So, I would like to do the dedication of this shiur in memory of my aunt. Um, so, I'd like to wish, my aunt's Hebrew name was Devora but Ze'ev Haleivi, Doreen, and I just like to wish my first cousins, Joe and Desi Costa, long life, and the children. And I'm really sorry for your loss. This is both from my brother and myself. And we learn with a group of friends, close friends, the Talmud and Mishnayos, etc. So tonight, this particular dedication is in honor of Doreen, and we all wish you long life. There are many people that watch the YouTube videos afterwards that are going to be seeing the dedication, but it's actually just a small group of us. And I'm very happy to be in South Africa at this moment. It looks like we have electricity because I've got an LED light illuminating the background, but in fact, it's the middle of load shedding, so that I don't miss. But I was pleased to have come back just over a week and a bit ago to be here to wish my cousins long life in person. And if you need anything, you just kindly let me know. So, what we've just discussed, we're learning Bava Kamma, which is the law of damages, and there are other topics that come into that particular Talmudic tractate. So we were learning this concept about the laws of Shemitah. So Shemitah is the seventh year in Eretz Yisrael where the land must lay fallow, just like one keeps the Sabbath. One doesn't get involved with any agricultural work in the seventh year. And the topic that came up was with regards to the sixth year, if certain seeds were planted, can you derive benefit in the seventh year from that particular produce? So what came out of there was if there was no human intervention in the seventh year, and it didn't require any sort of nutrients or watering, etc., you could make use of it in the seventh year if it was planted in the sixth. However, if you grew it in the seventh year, it was obviously forbidden. Now, there's this concept of bi'ur, which means removal. So what that means is that if you have a storage area and you collect the harvest within that storage facility and you keep it for the seventh year, you can only keep it up until the time of bi'ur, which is the official removal time, and that depends on one or two factors. Your first factor has to do with the fact of the plant itself. So, example, perennial plants that outlive the seventh year, that don't require human intervention, there's no problem storing it and using it during the seventh year for either yourself or your animals, whether it's animal fodder or human food, or certain byproducts that you may need. So if it's a perennial plant and doesn't require human intervention, you're fine. But if it does require human intervention or there's a life limit span on it, so for example, Arthur, you can come back on the camera at a certain point. So what we mean is that if the weather conditions change in Eretz Yisrael and it's extreme heat or cold, and that plant life would no longer survive, at that point where it's no longer available in the seventh field, unless human intervention causes either covering the plant for frost bite or protecting it against extreme sun, and it would die anyway. At that point, you cannot get further use of it, even if you harvested it grown from the sixth year into the seventh in your storage facility. Your other factor was if the animals would eat it as part of their natural habitat and wasn't environmentally available, even though it could be sustained in the environment, in that particular case, it was also be subject to the requirement of bi'ur removal. So the Gemara in Shavuos chapter 7 verse 1 was talking about three categories. The one category is human food. The other one is animal food. The third category is dye stuffs. So the concept there is it was talking about in the aftergrowth of safflower and woad, which are products used for dyeing fabrics, etc. So one of your issues that you have is that if it is a perennial plant that will survive through the 7th year without human intervention, that was planted in the 6th year, there's no problem using those products to make a dye, because since it will be environmentally available, you can have the sustainability of dyeing fabric with it. But the problem is, as far as if it's environmentally not sustainable, you cannot have a situation where the byproduct would outlast the Schmitter period of removal. So what we are saying is that the whole reason why Schmitter produce is basically forbidden to dye fabric is that its benefit is sustained long after the time of removal, because people only dye clothing in order to have a permanent advantage of the color change for that particular for years to come. So therefore that would be forbidden. It's the same thing with the fields of the olive fruit, where the tree was in the first 3 years. You're not allowed to get the benefit of using those dye products either, because it's forbidden for use. So as far as the other concept is concerned with Schmitter sanctity, is that if it was planted in the 6th year and you could use it in the 7th year, but there's a time limit to where it's no longer available in the environment, and then what you do is you take the goods out of your storehouses that you harvested within the 7th year, and you convert that to financial gain. So you sell it, and you've got enough product there to be able to generate 10,000 shekels, etc. The problem is that also attains Schmitter sanctity, and therefore that money has transferred the Schmitter sanctity from the object that you sold to the financial benefit. And the reason why you're not allowed to keep that money is because that money has to be removed before that period of bi'ur, because it's no longer available in the environment. And then if you use that money to buy goods with it, or books, or whatever the case may be, the Schmitter sanctity transfers from the money to those purchases, and again is forbidden after the period of bi'ur. So one of the concepts is the Gemara was asking, is the wood subject to Schmitter sanctity? Because wood, just like the dye byproducts, is known primarily as non-edibles. So therefore there was almost a comparison and said that maybe wood itself is subject to Schmitter sanctity. So Rava cited a brisa that contradicts this conclusion, if you remember. He said because there was a brisa that talked about the leaves of cane reeds and the leaves of grapevines that you gathered up from across the field to put into a storage unit. And if you gathered them for food, they do have Schmitter sanctity. But if you gathered them for wood, in other words, for kindling, they don't have Schmitter sanctity. So therefore, it seems to contradict the Mishnah that we studied, because this brisa is saying they don't have Schmitter sanctity. So we're seeing two different contradictions. In other words, are you allowed to use wood in your storehouse of wood that was planted prior to the 7th year, but the offshoots or aftergrowth can be used for wood, whether it be furniture or kindling, etc.? Are you allowed to use that in the 7th year if it's no longer available in the environment and you've put it into storage? So the Mishnah says no, well, it implies no, and the brisa says yes, you can. So Rava answers that the contradiction is pretty simple, because what we're doing is we're basing it on a pasuk in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 6, and that discussion is as follows. It says that basically Schmitter sanctity applies only to produce whose benefit coincides with its consumption. So obviously that excludes Schmitter sanctity from wood, because the main benefit of wood, your main category in the Gemara, is that the benefit comes only after the consumption. In other words, after the wood has been consumed by fire and reduced to coals. So just a couple of points is that the verse in Vayikra is talking about the fact that if something attains Shemitah sanctity, it has to resemble the process of eating. Now, it's not just eating that's within that category, because in Shavuos chapter 7, verse 1, it says there are three categories. There's human food, animal food, and dyestuffs. So what we realize there is that animal food and human food is a concept of eating, and that concept is to extend to another law, and that is what happens when you eat is that you use up that particular product. So if you roast a chicken and you eat that chicken, it's being consumed or decimated. If you're saying that you burn your books at the end of the matric year before you go into university as a celebration, you basically, those books have been consumed by fire and they're no longer available. So consumed is not only eating, but a process of destruction. Therefore, with the process of destruction, if the benefit occurs simultaneously to the process of destruction, then that is eligible for Shemitah sanctity. But if the benefit is achieved after consumption or destruction, so to speak, then it's not subject to Shemitah sanctity. So what do we mean? Is if you have a look at wood, as far as that's concerned, is that there are different categories of wood that the guys did mention. There are three major categories. The one is wood is used for heating. The major categories, the one is wood is used for cooking. The second category is heating, and the third category is light. So as far as the secondary category of heating, we said that it wasn't a major concerned issue because we get it from the Pasuk in Bereshit, where it was either in Nisan or Tishrei, where the temperature in both in the northern and southern hemispheres was either autumn or spring, depending on which hemisphere you were in, and therefore you didn't need flames for heating for life sustainability. The second aspect is, as far as light is concerned, it wasn't a major category because at the time when the world was created, there was Hashem put a special light in the world, which we learned was later taken away, that it was Orat Tzadikim, the light that was reserved for the tzaddiks in the world to come. So the world had a different sort of luminescence, and therefore at that time when the rules were put forward, it wasn't as if you were needing that sort of flamage for luminescence. So the only category that was left with the common usage, as we learned in the Gemara, was for cooking. They didn't exactly have eskom, and we don't have eskom now. So that's why we're in darkness, apart from our background. So the thing of it is, what we said is that generally when you're cooking a fire, what happens is as follows. If you put in wood and you get a lot of flames, you'll burn your chicken on the outside and it will be raw on the inside, and you're likely to get salmonella and a very raw chicken. So that's not the way you would cook a chicken. What you would do is you would make sure the wood becomes coal like embers, and then when there's an even heat and not so much flames, would the chicken cook more evenly over a longer period of time. So therefore, as far as the Shemitah is concerned, the wood doesn't get Shemitah sanctity because the benefit of cooking the food is derived after the wood is no longer recognizable to where it becomes coals and then coal embers, etc. So since the wood has already been destroyed at an earlier time to which you get benefit, the cooked food, that does not attain Shemitah sanctity at all. As far as the concept is concerned with eating, as it gets put in your mouth, etc., that's the point that that food no longer becomes recognizable. And it's at that point where it's just a fait accompli that your body will get the natural benefits because it's already gone into your biological system. So that would attain Shemitah sanctity because it resembles, in the Pasuk, the concept of eating. And therefore, if you ate it in the seventh year, you've done two things simultaneously. You've destroyed it by the time you have to, because it has to be removed if it's no longer available in the field due to environmental reasons, or the animals would have consumed it. So you've removed it from storage by eating it and consuming and destroying it, while you've retained the beneficial value at simultaneously. So then this makes sense, because when you look at the brisa, we say that the leaves of cane reeds and the leaves of grapevines that one gathered up from across the field to put into storage, if you gather them for food, they have Shemitah sanctity. Meaning, cane reeds and the leaves of grapevines can be used for two things. They can either be used for firewood, or they can be used to feed your animals with animal fodder. So if they're used for food for your animals, because the benefit to the animals of consuming and eating it coincides with the destruction of the food being recognizable in its present state, in that particular case, they have attained Shemitah sanctity because it mimics the pasuk. In the case of those exact products being used for wood to cook, for kindling, in that particular case, because the benefit is derived after the consumption and not it in no ways coincides, it does not attain Shemitah sanctity. So the Rava's brisa is resolved. So the Gemara questions the exclusion of all woods on the grounds that their benefit is derived after their consumption. So the Gemara is saying basically what was asked before, like Gavin mentioned, and Arthur also discussed in Kevin, is that there are different sorts of uses, but as we said, it's the common usage that takes precedence over all the other usage. But there is what you know as oily wood. So oily wood are certain woods that emit some sort of oil product which are much more flammable. And we're saying in that particular case, the benefit coincides with its consumption. Why? Because if it's used for a torch to light up, while you're getting the benefit of the light, you're actually consuming and burning the wood. So therefore, we want to know in that case, maybe that sort of usage of the wood gets Shemitah sanctity. So Rava was basically saying that wood in general, even oily wood, stands to be used for fueling a fire and not for use as a torchlight, for the reasons we explained in Bereshit, that the most common use is in fact to cook food, and the other uses are not primary. But what we've got to know is this whole conversation and the concept about the Shemitah status of oily wood is actually part of a much earlier dispute, because Rav Kahana said, and whether we say that oily wood gathered for use as a torch has no Shemitah sanctity, because you want to say in general that wood stands to be used for fueling a fire, actually that's a matter of tonight dispute, because it was taught in a brisa, you can't hand over Shemitah produce for use in soaking a pool of flax, nor use in a laundering pool. Okay? But Rav Yossi says one may place Shemitah produce in a soaking pool or in a laundering pool. So we're going to obviously unravel this discussion of the rabbis and Rav Yossi. But basically, if you look at this issue of a laundering pool and a soaking pool of flax, we're studying what happens if you use products that grew in the 6th year that you harvested in the 7th year, and there was a delayed benefit. In other words, there's a concept called retting, that you want to separate your fibers in flax, and what you do is you chemically put it in a laundering pool, or whatever the case may be, where the fibers start to separate. Now, when you put in the chemical, it takes 3 or 4 days to start to render the fibers separate, and therefore the benefit is only achieved days after the initial consumption of the chemicals, to where they no longer can be used elsewhere, because they're interacting with their chemical reaction on the fiber of the fabric and with the water that it's contained with. In other words, if that chemical is already used for a different product, you can't suddenly withdraw the chemical out of the water and the fabric and use it for something else. So therefore, the chemical is being used and destroyed simultaneously. The chemical is being used immediately, but the effect is not achieved simultaneously because it takes 3 or 4 days for the full process of laundering the fabric or soaking flax to take place. So Rav Yossi says you can use it. You can actually use Shemitah produce in a soaking pool or laundering pool. So what Rav Yossi is actually saying is, even if the benefit comes after the consumption, you can still use Shemitah produce, which is implying that Shemitah produce, in fact, it does, even if the benefit is delayed from consumption, it can be used in that particular case, which goes against the general rabbinic opinion, which is saying it has to mimic the pasuk in terms of eating, meaning the minute the benefit is delayed from the initial consumption, it's at that point that it doesn't achieve Shemitah sanctity. And Rav Yossi is saying that in fact, even if the benefit is delayed from consumption and they don't happen at the same time, it still could be a problem. So so basically the Gemara analyzes the basis of the dispute because it wants to demonstrate its earlier statement that the status of oily woods is the subject of the initial Tanaic dispute. So the first thing that the Gemara does is establishes a scriptural source for each opinion, and it says, look, what is the reasons for the rabbis? In other words, that you cannot hand over Shemitah produce for anything that the benefit is delayed from the initial consumption, whether you soak in a pool of flax or a laundering pool. Because they're reading the verse in Vayikra Leviticus is stating that regarding Shemitah produce, that the sabbatical produce shall be for you to eat, which implies for not use in a soaking pool or laundering pool, because the consumption and benefit have to happen simultaneously in terms of the exact same time, relative. There can't be a delayed process of benefit. But Rav Yossi is analyzing the pasuk in a different way. So it starts off the sabbatical produce, etc., and he's saying he puts a comma. He says, shall be for you, and not like the rabbis who say, shall be for you to eat. In other words, he's excluding the term eat, so it implies that the benefit and the consumption don't have to happen simultaneously. And when he says the word you, it means that for all your needs, even where the benefit is delayed from the initial consumption, whereas the rabbis say, shall be for you to eat. In other words, they're linking the word to eat to you, whereas Rav Yossi is saying that it's only focusing on you. Yes, one of the functions might be to eat, but for all your needs, even in the delayed process. Okay? But according to the rabbis, the Gemara says, well, it also says for you, so maybe you can read it like Rav Yossi, for all your needs. So why then do you have to expound the phrase to eat to exclude anything that Shemitah produce has where the benefit is delayed from the initial consumption, such as soaking flax or laundering? So the Gemara says they basically expound the expression for you to permit only uses that are similar to eating. In other words, any use where the benefit coincides with the consumption, and therefore it would exclude the Shemitah produce in a soaking pool or laundering pool. Why? Because the benefit comes only after the consumption. So what we are doing is we are saying as follows, okay? According to one opinion, wood is generally used for fueling a fire, and therefore wood is never subject to Shemitah sanctity, ever, because that's the common usage. Even oily wood gathered for use of a torch, because generally it's used for cooking. But there's another opinion that said wood isn't necessarily free of Shemitah sanctity. And oily wood, if you're using it to light a torch, is subject to Shemitah sanctity because the benefit and consumption are happening at the same time. So in essence, the dispute concerns Rava's assertion that Shemitah sanctity depends on actually the gatherer's intent. Only when the plant can be used for two purposes. So we said like cane leaves and grape leaves. In other words, there it could be used either to feed your animals or used for wood. And therefore, the gatherer's intent of what you would use it for determines Shemitah's sanctity. When you're using it to feed your animals for fodder, where the consumption occurs in line with the benefit, subject to Shemitah's sanctity. When the benefit is delayed from consumption, like kindling a fire, it does not attain Shemitah's sanctity. So it's again, gatherer's intent, only where a plant is commonly used for more than one purpose. Okay? But if a plant is used only for a single purpose, the Shemitah's sanctity is determined even if the gatherer picked it for another use. Why? Because the common reason that, for example, you plant grapes is not to use a chemical reaction of the alcohol to separate flax fibers and create retting, because it has to be used for sanctity. So therefore, if you grow grapes, that's the general purpose. If you use it for a different purpose, it still has Shemitah's sanctity. And therefore, it's a different case, because as far as Rav Yossi is concerned, there's no problem, because any benefit that you do is fine. The major problem is this concept of permanence. So when you're dyeing a fabric, for example, you're going to get the permanence of dyed fabric, and you can't enjoy that permanence if that particular dyed plant is no longer available in the field within the seventh year, after a couple of months, due to weather conditions or animals consuming it. Then you can't, anything that you store, sell, dye that has permanence, can't use it anymore. So the permanence is a problem. As Rashi said, you can't do business with it. Business means the ability to either have it on a commercial value as opposed to private use. But the second problem with business is you're creating a permanence, because you're now taking something that would wither or die and storing it, or you would sell it for money, at which that money has outlasting benefit where it's no longer available, or you use that money that you've sold the Shemitah produce with in order to buy other articles. So anything that creates permanence is known in Gemara Sukkah 40a as doing business. So Rashi said it does make a difference. The other aspect is, do the effects actually occur? In other words, is it about gatherer's intent, or is it about common usage? So at least we know Rav Kahana is basically trying to demonstrate that, according to one Tanaic opinion, the gatherer's intent is always going to affect the Shemitah classification of the plant, even when the plant is generally used for a different purpose. So, according to Rav Kahana, irrespective of why it was grown, the gatherer has got full control. According to Rava, only when the plant's got more than one use has the gatherer got some semblance of control. According to other opinions from the Tanaic source, it's not the gatherer's intent, but the general reason why it's grown that dictates the halacha. Okay, so basically the rabbis say that using Shemitah produce for other needs is a problem, because it has to resemble eating. In other words, simultaneous destruction with benefit, they have to occur at the same time. Okay, so the problem is, as soon as flax or laundry is placed in the wine to soak, the wine is rendered unfit for consumption and it's considered destroyed. But the problem is, the benefit of those processes don't come until 3 or 4 days later, according to Rashi, when the retting or laundering is completed. So now the dispute between Rav Yossi and the rabbis as to whether one you can use Shemitah wine for soaking of flax or laundry doesn't refer to normal wine, guys, that's made from grapes, because that is only used for kedusha of human consumption. It's basically specific grapes that were picked in order to do chemical processes for soaking flax or laundering clothing. It's not if they were previously picked for wine. It's if they were picked for this purpose. So the dispute is whether grapes picked for some use other than drinking is subject to Shemitah sanctity. So the rabbis maintain that fruit is used for food, including grapes. So they're subject to Shemitah sanctity. Okay? And therefore, you have to use it in a manner where the benefit will coincide with its consumption. Because Shemitah sanctity takes effect at that time when it's grown and can't be undone later by picking the fruit for some other use. Okay? Where the benefit is delayed from the gathering. Only when there's grape leaves and cane leaves that it could either be used for animal fodder or for firewood, and then the gatherer's intent is relevant. Okay, Rav Yossi doesn't say that, doesn't hold like that. Okay, he holds that we don't say that edible fruit is always meant for human consumption. He says that when you pick them, it depends on what you want to use them for. And he doesn't basically just get that from logic. He gets that from the source of the word lachem, for you to use. So in other words, it supplies all human needs. Whereas the rabbis add the word to eat, which means benefit and consumption have to coincide. So in light of that dispute, Rav Kahana said that Rav's assertion regarding early woods for a torch is actually contingent upon this dispute. Why? Okay, let's just see how long we've got. Guys, can you hear me? Okay, I'll tell you why. Because if something is generally used in a manner where the benefit comes after the consumption, it's classified at the time as something that is not subject to Shemitah sanctity. Okay, so if the benefit, when you're growing it, when the benefit comes after the consumption, it doesn't have Shemitah sanctity. Okay, and even if the gatherer's subsequent intent is to use it in a manner where the benefit occurs simultaneously with the consumption, you can't suddenly impose Shemitah sanctity on it because it wasn't grown for that intent. So in wood, even oily wood is generally for the public, used for fueling a fire. So if the gatherer's intent is to use it as a torch, it can't impose Shemitah sanctity upon it. But according to Rav Yossi, the wood originally stood for fueling a fire, but that didn't define a Shemitah status. It's the gatherer's subsequent intent when he picked it, and that imposes Shemitah sanctity on it if he's using it as a torch as opposed to for kindling firewood. Do you get what I'm saying? So the rabbis are saying that it's at the point of you growing it, and Rav Yossi said it's at the gatherer's point. And that makes a difference. And Rav is saying if it's used for two purposes, only the gatherer's intent can affect it. According to Rav Kahana, the gatherer's intent can affect it kind of like irrelevant to that. And there are other Tanaic opinions that say it's about the general grown consent, irrespective of the gatherer, common use. All right, guys, we done.
Thank you.
Join Rav Simcha now. I hope this makes it clear.
Yeah, thank you. It's very good.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right, so guys, in a nutshell, you have one criteria, and more than one is known as criterion. It's the plural. So the criterion of the benefit. Who's got a background?
Sorry, it's me.
No problem. So the criterion of the benefit coinciding with the consumption serves two functions, guys. Just remember this, two functions. It determines which plants are subject to Shemitah sanctity. That's number one. And the benefit coinciding with the consumption also determines which usages are permitted for Shemitah sanctified plants. So it's not only which plants are subject to Shemitah sanctity, but which uses are permitted. So according to the rabbis, the Shemitah status of a plant is determined by its primary use. Okay, so if the primary use of the benefit doesn't coincide with the consumption, the plant is not subject to Shemitah sanctity. And you can use it for any purpose without concern of any Shemitah restrictions within the seventh year. So simply using it in a manner that the benefit does coincide with the consumption doesn't make it subject to Shemitah sanctity automatically. So basically, you've got another issue. Okay, so edible fruits such as wine and grapes are subject to Shemitah sanctity. Why? Because that's the intent at which they were grown, even if a gatherer picked it for laundering or soaking flax, because that was their primary use. Okay, that's according to the rabbis. Rav Yossi maintains that Shemitah sanctity of every plant can be affected by the gatherer's intentions. Okay, and what does that mean? A stringency and a leniency. So, for example, if somebody picked edible fruits for soaking or soaking, pool laundering or whatever, it says you can use the fruit because that Shemitah sanctity doesn't take effect because the benefit is delayed from the consumption. But if you're using oily wood as a torch, Rav Yossi says it does have Shemitah sanctity, and therefore you can't use it if that wood's no longer available in the field due to weather or animals consuming it. But Rav Yossi does agree with the rabbis that produce that is subject to Shemitah sanctity can't be used in ways in which the benefit does not coincide with.
There we go. Anyway, okay, so we're talking about compassion and cruelty, and this ties in. What I was saying is people can be so, let's say, in life, we don't always have to be strict and to take the harshest option in terms of judging people or doing something, because that can actually permeate into other aspects or spheres of life, and even in terms of becoming judgmental. If one doesn't, there are even cases where people won't go to a certain shul because it's not their way and only their way, it's their way or the highway. And in terms of relationships, please God, three of us will meet someone in the not too distant future, Damon, myself, and Gavin. If they are too rigid or we are too rigid, like I'll give you one example and I'll carry on to the next part. I can't eat this hefsha, I can't do that, I know people like that and they're still single. No one knows, Damon doesn't know anyone, Gavin does, not in South Africa, and Damon hasn't met them. That has to be this way, it's only this way, and that's it. And this is about the country, and it's got to be done this way, and it actually can drive you mad. So anyway, to be flexible and compromise in life, not so easy, but if we can strive for that, then it'll be good in all areas, and it'll make us more chilled and more relaxed. Okay, then just going back to the in terms of the section on judging, and sorry about this. It says here, so the Rambam addresses in an instance where a person experienced grave abuse and injustice is asked by the wrongdoer for forgiveness. The Rambam rules that failure to respond to such requests is considered cruel. Even in this instance, there is no middle ground. The lack of response to the other party is deemed cruelty. And the point is, in life, we may have to forgive. We may have to. It can work both ways. We may have done wrong somebody, and we need to then ask their forgiveness. We would, and then the shoe could be on the other foot, whereas they could ask us for forgiveness. So it's never only going to be one-sided throughout one's life. We're not perfect, and if someone really is genuine and contrite, we should actually give them forgiveness. Also, not so easy. And move on. It doesn't mean you'll still be their best mate. You can forgive and move on and be civil to the person and not hold any grudges or bad feelings. That's it's considered cruel, even though someone may have done a serious thing against somebody, or done something really wrong, or wronged them really financially or in a legal way, whatever. If they ask for forgiveness, one should do it. And I'll just give one quick 30-second. Can I just say something for another 30 seconds?
Sure.
So my mom is friendly with a lady who had a sister and has a brother. And the brother lives in America, and the sister was living in Joburg with my mom's friend. And they had a machlokas for like 30 years. 30 years. And recently, unfortunately, the one sister passed away. And a few months before she got ill, the sister made shalom. And it made the family so happy. And my mom's friend really was so relieved. And I don't know which one was in the wrong, but they got peace of mind, and they knew it was the right thing to do.
You know what I think?
I can't tell you he was in the wrong, but I can tell you.
Even so,
I can tell you he was in the right.
Even so, we're going back one step. Many years ago, their mom passed away. At the Shiva house, they were sitting on opposite ends of the room because they still weren't talking to each other then. But thank goodness, a few months ago they made shalom. But then a few weeks ago, the one sister passed away, so they made shalom in town.
No, thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God, yeah. At least.
So just one thing I want to ask you, Kev, as a matter of interest, is that you can often in your heart forgive somebody fully and say to them, listen, I absolutely give you, etc. But you see, the problem is that certain people, it's like that saying, with toxic people, they're like clouds. When they leave, it's a sunny day. And I'm saying some people you invite back in your life and there's drama. So, one could say to them, listen, I forgive you completely. We're not all perfect. But I don't think it's a healthy relationship that necessarily that we spend a lot of time together. But I hold no grudges, and it takes a big person to apologize, and I really appreciate it. It's just I think people can be on good terms, I would say to them. Don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time together because it might just not be healthy for both of us, but it takes a big person to apologize. And I have said that to certain people because I don't want them back in my life. They're trouble. They are draining, they're toxic, they create, and they repeat the pattern. I'm not saying if it was a once-off infraction, but sometimes people have got personality disorders. You get what I'm saying? So you can forgive them, and every now and again say, listen, I'm quite happy to just touch base with you. But, you can often, even if you can't say that to somebody, you can just say, listen, things have been really hectic and busy. Are we getting together? But hectic, they'll get the message. In other words, you phone to find out if they're well, and you leave it at that. And you properly forgive. But it doesn't mean you're allowed to be abused or toxically brought back into.
You can keep your distance, but in a civil way. It can be still done civilly, yeah. You can't be mates. Can't see everyone. It's impossible to see every friend or speak to everybody anyway. So